Hey everyone, and welcome to the World's Fix. I'm Shock, currently curing my condition of copium, and I'm joined by the Yumi on your back and the announcer at DreamHack, Amelg. I feel like the lead up to the event was pretty positive for Chiefs. So they won the finals, obviously. That's pretty positive. But like there were like a lot of tweets about the Chiefs players, like how well they were doing in Champs Queue, how well they were doing in scrims. Like I think Dragku and Doublelift were kind of popping off together.
Holy shit, the Chiefs are winning worlds. It's not even close. You're fucking brain dead and you're trolling if you don't think Arthur is the best player in the universe.
You might have cursed us.
Everything was kind of looking good, honestly. Like I think everyone thought that this was kind of our best chance at Worlds, right?
Yeah.
Like I think I remember even seeing tweets from Chiefs players being like, if this roster doesn't do it, no roster's going to do it. And hey, like I agreed, right? I agreed. But when it got to the games themselves, things did go a bit downhill.
Yeah, I feel like it is kind of a thing that we sort of end up repeating every year with like, oh, this is the best roster, for real this time. But yeah, this one did honestly feel like one of the more stacked rosters we've had, and the results we got really didn't reflect that.
It was pretty strange because I thought the Chiefs actually had a pretty good grasp on like what would succeed at Worlds. Like they're pretty well-rounded. They've like play a variety of team comps. They don't have like huge champion pool issues, I feel like. They also had pretty good team play. Like it didn't feel like a team that was like super one-dimensional. But then kind of when the game started, it really felt like those few disadvantages or those few weaknesses they had that kind of didn't get exploited in OS started getting like exploited really hard.
In this all-important game are still playing aggro.
Well, here's the engagement, becomes lightning, Zenith Blade, double bramble smash, the headbutt backwards!
So I wonder if like it was the thing where when Chiefs first got over there, their kind of play style wasn't that figured out. Maybe the holes in the champion pools weren't really discovered yet, but then like as it went on and people kind of figured out Chiefs a bit more, they just started having a really good grasp on how to beat them maybe.
It seemed like they weren't really that comfortable on stage once they started getting behind.
When there isn't really people to challenge you in your region, I think it's hard to kind of really elevate yourselves. You can only be, or it's like just very difficult to improve beyond your region. It's possible, but for the most part, you're just like a bit above your region, right?
Yeah.
And I think one thing about going to Worlds is that like 3 weeks or so where you're kind of like boot camping before Worlds starts, that's like really important. That's like your time to catch up. In fact, I even remember, I think it was G2 one of the years saying that they felt like when they went to Worlds, they were quite behind. But then after scrimming like the Asian teams and stuff, they became a lot better. So I think like how they use that 3 weeks is really important. And it's hard to say how well they used it because like I know Tally, for example, didn't play any Champs Queue. So
Really?
like that was a big like question mark for me because I think that, we'll kind of skip ahead a bit, but Tally's been getting like a lot of flack for the games, right? And some of that's justified, but I think that if you take any OS mid laner and you just like put them in those games like straight away without any preparation, I think all of them would lose. I don't think it would matter who, but I think that 3 weeks again, like before the game start, that's like really your chance to shore up those weaknesses, like take those bad habits that OC solo queue has kind of like given you and fix those up. So Tally not playing any Champs Queue was kind of like weird to me. And I wonder, because like the thing is a lot of the other team were playing Champs Queue, right? In fact, I think the entire rest of the other team. Of the
Even
team.
Dragku,
Yeah, I know Dragku. He was playing a lot.
What is Draku's win rate in Champions Queue? This guy is winning every game. The funniest thing is, Draku is their sub and he's fisting everyone.
He's actually Core JJ Reborn. His name is Dragon Guo, and he is actually ripped as fuck.
At the end of the day, there's like a million excuses it could be. It could be they got figured out, they didn't have a read on the meta, et cetera, et cetera. It could be the lights on stage were too bright. At some point, you just got to say like no excuses and just like let the gameplay speak for itself. And the gameplay just wasn't good enough. And I think that
It didn't really speak at all.
yeah, it did not speak at all. Okay, one thing when I was reading these like Reddit threads is I really hate how Reddit just like, I swear they don't even watch the game.
Oh, yeah,
like
no,
they have this like idea maybe off like the first game that they've watched and then they just like apply it to the rest of them. So again, I'm going to use Tally as an example. Like I remember like the EG game and the Fnatic game, I think Tally was like a big part of why Chiefs lost, right? And he was like justifiably getting kind of called out for that. But then there was some other games, like I think Tally's Talia game and Tally's Galio game, like he played fine and the team still lost, right? Like he's not the only player on the team, but like all the comments and stuff are still just like shitting on Tally, which is like, sure, you can shit on him for the games he like really underperformed or like was a big kind of reason they were losing, but they just like ignored the other members of the team, which I think is a big thing. And it also makes me wonder if like, you know, again, lots of people saying just like, you know, replace Tally, like he can't stand up against these other mid laners. But then in the games where he did stand up to those mid laners, they still lost. Like the team as a whole was just outclassed across the board. I think Arthur played pretty well overall, I would say, but the rest of them kind of took turns playing well and playing bad. Although I do think part of this is because as you know, kind of lose more games and you lose confidence and stuff, it definitely feels like you get more desperate. Like I think it was the fourth game versus BYG maybe. It really looked to me like Aladoric was playing very desperate, like going for a lot of engages. And like I can get that, right? Like you've got to make something happen. Like nothing seems to be working. So I can get that. But yeah, a lot of the Chiefs kind of just outperformed, and it's going to be interesting to see kind of like how we avoid this next year, or maybe this is just it from now on.
Yeah, I definitely think like with regards like the whole narrative thing, especially on Reddit, it's one of those things where like if we had any sort of OS talent at Worlds, I feel like that would help a lot, because ultimately I feel like a lot of the viewers' perception of like who's playing well and who's not comes from like the casters during the game, like the analysts and stuff, and sort of not having that actual OS presence really lets us, you know, get fucked by everyone on all sides. And yeah, because I was listening to like the analysts talking about like Chiefs and like introducing them and stuff, and you can just sort of tell that like they're kind of just like rolling off stats and stuff from the season, but they don't have that context.
Yeah,
that
right.
OS talent would have, right? And yeah, it just sucks. Another day in the life of an OS viewer, I guess.
Yeah. If you take away all those excuses and look purely at the gameplay, it's hard to really pinpoint like one thing as being like this was the reason kind of things went bad for them. Because I feel like there were some games that had sort of like weird drafts. Like I remember there was a game where like Lee was prioritized over Hecarim. I remember there was a game where like Swain was picked into Victor. So there's like some weird drafting things. Then maybe there's also some champ pool things like, you know, about like Tally can't play Azir, for example, that was very high priority of the tournament. And then, yeah, and then just like on a play kind of point of view, you had games where, like I remember there was like one game where Topham was like 3-0 on Vlad or something, maybe, and he was like doing quite well. But then there was another game where Topham's like 0-5 on Camille, right? So they just kind of struggled to really find like 5 players on their team playing well at the same time. And I guess that's just like what happens when you verse a team that's better than you. You know, you just suddenly get exploited for things that you don't. And it really sucks for Chiefs because like, they must have had such high expectations for themselves as well, right?
Yeah,
and it just all kind of crumbled.
I feel like the Chiefs' performance also does raise a lot of question marks as to where OS sort of stands within the world, or I guess like OS's future in terms of like how good we actually are, because it feels like before 2022, I don't know, OS was pretty good, right?
Yeah, I think 2021, there were like some pretty good results internationally. PGG and Peace, I think both did pretty well. And I think, yeah, you're right about how this kind of, it's a bit sketchy for the rest of the region just because it's like people aren't sure now, I think, how big is the gap basically between us and other regions? Because if you just look at it from like a results point of view, like 0-13 for the year, that's like, okay, this is the weakest region by far. It's like you put them in these groups with other wildcards and they can't even win a single game. So that makes you think, you know, are we really the weakest region in the world by like a huge amount? And I kind of don't think so. Like I think a lot of, I mean, even if you look at like the Chiefs players, like these are players that have played in other regions before and they've done like decently or they've done well. So it's not like, at least on an individual level, I don't feel like the gap is like insane.
Yeah.
But I do think that maybe from a team level that there is like some kind of stagnation or that we are sort of behind in that aspect. I know the casters were bringing up stuff about how like OC is relatively disadvantaged as a region. And I definitely agree with that, right? Like isolated, low funding, et cetera, solo queue. You know, there's a lot of like problems with the region, right? And I think that, again, like the results from this year will be I actually think it will have negative effects on OS because I think it kind of, in a lot of people's minds, it's like a confirmation that like, you know, that region is dead. You know, Riot gave up on them. Now we give up on them too, right?
Even straight from the Worlds draw, I feel like Chiefs, you know, they were kind of laughing to the bank with like the draw that they got. And it really showed like where we do fit within the minor regions, because sure, you can write off MSI and Order because, you know, they got put in the group with G2 and EG and had to play them like a million times. But this time, you know, had a bunch of minor regions in our group and we failed to sort of show any real promise in those games.
I definitely think there's like still ways for OC to kind of come back. And I think next year will be I really want to see some teams and some players try something new, not just like not in the sense of like the game itself, like how they play the game, but more in the sense of like, how they prepare, how they scrim, stuff like that. Looking forward to next year. There's going to be some changes around here, not just with the rosters, but with the orgs themselves. I think there's 3 new orgs, because there's Order selling, Peace selling, and Mammoth selling, or Gravitas selling?
Well, Gravitas already sold.
Oh.
Yeah, they're Bliss.
Oh, okay. I was thinking like I knew Bliss was in, but I didn't know who they replaced. But okay, that's good to know. So yeah, there's going to be 3 new orgs, and that has potential, because like I think a lot of the time a new org comes in and they kind of want to make a splash, right?
Yeah.
They want to drop some big bucks, maybe bring Shock out of retirement. I'm not looking for a team. But anyway, so I think like that there's potential there for some kind of funding and stuff to come back in the region. And also every year, even teams that do well, like there's a few roster shifts, and there could be some players imported, like I think from Chiefs, especially the ones that haven't played in NA before, have a fairly good chance of being imported. Like I think Arthur, Alazoric, and Draku all have a pretty decent shot.
Yep.
I'd be sort of surprised if anyone outside of Chiefs got imported, but it's possible. What do you think?
Yeah, I can't really think of anyone off the top of my head. Like,
I think you could maybe argue Kise.
yeah, I was thinking that because he's like quite young.
I would be kind of surprised still, just because it feels like you don't generally get picked up unless you like win. Although he did play at MSI, so he did win, but like recency biased. I don't know. There's a possibility for Kise, but I'd still be pretty surprised if there were anyone not on Chiefs picked up. And so I think the rosters as a whole, like just across everyone, will change quite a bit. And it'll be interesting to see what people value next year. Like, obviously the Chiefs players are very good, right? But if they didn't find success at Worlds, are they still going to mostly stay together, or are they going to kind of, go their separate ways? I think that could be kind of interesting as well. And also there's like some players potentially coming out of retirement, right? So
Like who?
gotta keep it on the DL,
I'm sure like after seeing the competition this year, people are going to be more encouraged to come back to playing, like Shock.
Very funny.
But yeah, I'm more interested in the orgs because, like you said, it's a chance to sort of breathe some fresh air into the LCO.
Yeah, I guess we'll cover the roster changes maybe like next year sometime, like before the season starts, get really into when we got some more rumors coming out. But one thing I would like to see beyond just like rosters and orgs and stuff like that is, again, I'd really like to see teams kind of just like go crazy and try some new stuff. So I think stuff like what PGG tried, like as an experiment with where they bootcamped in Perth and scrimmed the Vietnamese teams, I think that's like a really good idea.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to see teams like try bootcamping. I can only speak for myself, but I think like when I went to Korea, I had like a really big effect on me as a player, and there'll be like plenty of players who haven't played it outside of the region at all that I think could benefit a lot from it. Yeah. Obviously, not every team can do it, right? Because not every team has a bunch of money to just like go and drop on a boot camp. But in my opinion, it can be very valuable. It does, you kind of get out of it what you put into it. And I think if teams are like really, if they're focused on getting good stuff out of it, it definitely is worth it. And I think it's a really good way to elevate the kind of level of the region. I think as a whole, just doing not the bare minimum, but just taking the easiest route of like playing OC solo queue and like scrimming OC teams. I think this is just like, it's not really going to work.
Yeah.
Like the OC solo queue quality is so fucking bad. It is actually so bad. It's unbelievable. I genuinely think if you're on like a top 3 team as a pro player, you should pretty much not play OC solo queue. I actually think it's like probably makes you worse. Now, it's going to be better than if you just like do nothing, right? Like if instead of playing solo queue, you go and play like Valorant or Apex Legends, maybe that's me. But if you do that, like that's probably not as good, right? But if you're using that time constructively, like 1v1ing, VODs, like watching your scrims, playing more scrims, I think that's all like way more valuable. But like that's just my opinion, right?
It definitely does seem like you do get diminishing returns from solo queue, especially if you are like one of the higher players on the ladder, right? You don't really have much to gain from that. I don't know what else there is to do though. I don't know how much like do players do like, because I know in NA they do like 1v1s and stuff, or like Fudge specifically like does a lot of 1v1s with the coaches. Do you think that's...
Yeah, I'm not sure, because like I think you are sort of reliant on having your coaches being good at that, because like if you're 1v1ing people on other teams, right, it like shows what you might want to play. Obviously it helps both you and them, as opposed to just like keeping it kind of within your team. So that was like definitely a thing more with coaches like Fantix that were very like hands-on with their coaching and like individual coaching focused. I think, I don't know, it just feels to me that the OC solo queue, it is almost like solo queue's always been a different game from competitive, but I think especially now it's like even more so because the teams are often like very imbalanced. On top of that, at least for mid, it's like you're queuing for a long time and there's like a high chance of being off-rolled. Like in terms of how much actual like effective practice you get out of it, it's tiny compared to the amount of like time you have to put into it. And I think again, like if you're not doing anything better, then you shouldn't just like cut it out and go play Minecraft or something, right? But if there is something you can do with that time, I think just about everything else is more valuable.
I feel like it would be really cool to see teams sort of adjust the way that they approach practice, because we've sort of got the standard of like scrims, solo queue, review or whatever. I don't know, do some other shit, like take a shot before draft prep and see what comes out, you know? Even outside of the game, like content wise, just something new, something that will bring eyes to the LCO and like to Oceania. I feel like, I don't know, breath of fresh air, you know?
Yeah. It's very easy to say this is an outsider, by the way. I know it's a lot harder to do.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
But I guess just to kind of summarize everything, I'm pretty, even though we've kind of shit on the Chiefs a little bit this episode, they still kind of had a really just fantastic year, right? Like super dominant, really good team. And actually, I still kind of agree. I think that the Chiefs definitely this year had the best chance of any team to do well internationally. And I almost feel like their performance is more a symptom of the problems Oceania has. And they're kind of just like, both them and Order are just like a bit unfortunate that it happened to be them in the limelight going 0-13. I actually think it's very possible that no matter what teams you would have sent from Oceania would have had the same result. So hopefully the region as a whole improves, as that just makes it, just makes it easier for everyone to improve. The rising tide lifts all boats.
That's all for the World's Fix. We'll catch you next time for your weekly... We'll catch you next time.